Hello, my name is Eric James. This is FTE 217 Modern Sporting Rifle Week 7 assignment. For this assignment, I'm going to talk about trigger work, when it should be performed, when it should not be performed, any problems that can occur due to improper trigger work, what constitutes improper trigger work, and how to avoid those problems. Then I'm going to go into a detailed inspection of the rifle, talking about what I'm looking for, followed by checking the safety systems. And finally, we'll talk about the easiest and most difficult parts to repair or alter on the AR platform. So from here, what I'm going to do is clear the rifle real fast. When is trigger work absolutely necessary? The only time that trigger work is absolutely necessary is when the trigger group is broken, whether that's the disconnector, the hammer, or the trigger itself and the springs. That's the only time that trigger work is absolutely necessary. Other times that it might be necessary is a customer wants a drop-in trigger to lighten the trigger weight, increase the feel on the trigger, and to acquire a more consistent trigger pull. When it should not be performed is when somebody wants to just lighten the trigger up. My opinion only, that's when it shouldn't be done. In order to get away from that or get through that, my recommendation would be put a drop-in trigger with the desired weight and go from there. Some problems that can occur from improper trigger work starts with a sloppy trigger feel. So you had creep before, now you've got more creep and it feels mushy. That's a problem that will occur from improper trigger work. Another problem would be just a failure to fire. Your springs are improperly installed. That be the hammer spring or the trigger spring completely backwards and not doing their job. You can get a failure to cock. There's no trigger reset because the disconnector is not capturing the hammer before it falls onto the trigger sear. And then a trigger that unintentionally breaks, accidental or negligent discharge. Because the sear surfaces are worn, the sear angles are not correct, causing the trigger to fall prematurely. And then finally, what constitutes improper trigger work? Accidental discharge, backward springs, and just a trigger that is absolute trash from what it was before. How to avoid that? Install a drop-in trigger. That's the simplest way to do it. There's no springs you need to mess with. It's just two pins and you're done. There are other triggers out there that look like mil spec, but they're not. They're optimized for a lighter full weight and a better feel that install the same way as the mil specs. Trigger work in my mind is a no-go just because it brings on a liability that I'm not willing to take. If something happens to the trigger after I've done work, it's my fault, not the shooter. So that's how I'm going to avoid doing improper trigger work, is just not taking on trigger work unless it's drop-in work. From here, what I'll do is go into the detailed inspection. All right, for the detailed inspection, what I'm looking for, I'm going to use the cycle of operations to determine that the rifle functions as intended. Then I'm going to tear the rifle apart and inspect the chamber, the feed ramp surfaces, the feed ramp mating surfaces. I'll check the trigger, disconnector, and then follow on with the safeties. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a magazine with dummy rounds, insert it in the rifle. This rifle was cleared earlier. So from here, what I'm looking for is feeding, chambering, and locking. When we've got full lockup, we'll pull it back. There's a round in the chamber and a round on the bolt. So from here, I'm going to pull the trigger, make sure the safety's engaged and doesn't let the hammer fall. Flip it on safe, aim in a safe direction, pull the trigger. From here, I'm looking for unlocking, extracting, and ejecting, as well as cocking. I'll be listening for it when I let the charging handle go. So from there, to verify it again, we have chambered around, and I'm going to let the trigger go and listen for the audible pop. So we'll do it one more time. This time it should lock open on an empty chamber or on an empty magazine. And it did. Magazine's empty. So from here, I'm going to pull the rifle down or apart, just separating upper and lower receivers. Pull the bolt out, looking for proper movement on the bolt, verifying that the firing pin, retaining pin is in, the firing pin is present, and the bolt, extractor, and ejector are all present. I would be inspecting the gas key as well to make sure it's not loose and that the screws are staked to make sure that we're not going to have a gas leak there. Then from there, I am looking for the feed ramp engagement surfaces, so where the barrel extension meets the upper receiver. Looking for a smooth transition. It looks like we've got a smooth transition. Looking for any kind of wear and tear on the chamber, on the throat of the chamber. If I would pull this apart and I would verify that the gas block is still tight and not moving around. I'm not going to do that on camera for sake of time. And we'll move on to the lower. So from here, the lower or the safety selector is on safe. I pull the trigger, capturing the hammer just in case it does fall. Pull the trigger on fire and let the hammer go slowly. I'm looking for the sear surface here, or the disconnector surface, to meet with the disconnector down here. There's no issues. Looking for any wear. You can't really see it, but on the hammer sear, making sure it's not rounded over or there's any damage to it. Also looking for proper spring placement. That really does the detailed inspection. It's pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy. So from here, the safety systems and disconnector, I kind of already alluded to it with the rifle on, or with the selector on safe. So it's on safe. I'm gonna hold the hammer, pull the trigger, nothing should happen. And I'm gonna flip it on safe and let it go. So from here, after the round is fired, the bolt is gonna slide across the top of the hammer. I'm gonna pull the trigger like it's been fired, and I'm performing the follow through, making sure that the sear or the disconnector is engaging the hammer lug and letting it pop loose. So from there, I'm looking for proper engagement, that the disconnector is going to hold the hammer down until I let it go, like that. So when it comes to what I believe is the most difficult or the easiest parts to modify or repair on an AR platform, honestly, I don't have a good answer. My initial thought is I've been working on these rifles for 20 years to a point, making me very comfortable with it. I think the most difficult thing for me would be to do a trigger job on one where I'm stoning the sear surfaces to lighten the trigger and remove some of the creep that's in the trigger. Besides the trigger, everything else is pretty easy in my mind until I get into it. As I progress in my gunsmithing career, I think that'll change. But right now, the most difficult part would be the trigger. The easiest thing for me is the modularity of the rifle itself. So that should do it for this week's video. Thanks for watching.